Very good morning to you from the KTN News Center here in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. And happy Easter to you, wherever you're watching us from the team here on KTN News. We hope you're having a blessed day. It is the 4th day of April 2021. Today we'll talk about several issues. Vaccine wars, currently ongoing COVID vaccine wars, following the government ban on any private importation and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines. Just what gives there? This coming just days after the government okayed the Sputnik V vaccine from Russia. We'll get into that. Later on, we'll get into politics, talk about what's happening with the handshake. We did see Raila Odinga, ODM leader, and President Uhuru Kenyatta. They're having a night meeting, we are told by our sources. Then they spend a day inspecting development projects in the capital, Nairobi. Does that mean everything is okay in the handshake and the BBI process that ODM leaders had raised red flags over? We'll get into that. Also, we'll get into the ODM nomination confusion following communication that came from the Orange Party that Raila Odinga had applied to be on the party's presidential ticket. Then later on, a day later, the same party came out and said that was an April Fool's prank and Raila Odinga has not applied and is not on the hat for the ODM party. We'll get into that ODM confusion. Many thanks for staying with us. Be sure to stick with us for the next 2 hours or so as we dissect some of these issues for you, try to make sense of what's happening in this country. Let's begin with what happened on Friday when the Health Cabinet Secretary Mutahi Kagwe announced the ban on private importation and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines. Take a look.
From now henceforth, there will be no more importation of COVID-19 vaccines by any private entity. According to the Ministry of Health, the move has been taken to prevent use or distribution of counterfeit vaccines.
Government is effective today closing the window of private sector importation, distribution, and administration of vaccines.
The private sector will therefore not receive any form of licensing to allow them to vaccinate people in the country. The existing licenses of operation have also been revoked.
There will be no licensing of private players in the importation of vaccines, and any such license given will be and is hereby terminated.
The ministry is not taking this vaccines matter lightly, as anyone who will be found importing them will be charged and prosecuted. The ban comes after some prominent Kenyans were vaccinated using Russian-made Sputnik V.
Any person advertising or vaccinating people for a fee will therefore be in contravention of Pharmacy and Poisons Board regulations governing emergency use authorization and the Public Health Act.
However, the Ministry of Health has assured Kenyans who have gotten the first jab that they will get the second jab when the second shipment arrives.
Those who took the Sputnik vaccine are assured of their second dose. You are going to work with the importer.
The ban comes at a time when the new infections continues on an upward trajectory. Over the last 24 hours, 1,851 Kenyans tested positive for the virus. This was from a sample size of 9,676 that was tested. The positivity rate now stands at 19.1%. According to the ministry statistics, 185 patients are battling for their lives in ICU. The number of the patients who have died over the same period stands at 19. Building Walieula, KTN News.
All right, I'm joined this morning by Roslyn Obala, political editor at the Standard Group, my colleague. I'm also joined by political risk analyst Dismas Makua, and joining us via Zoom is communication strategist Mark Bichachi and governance expert Hesbon Owila. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Happy Easter to you all. Thank you for joining me this morning. Let me begin with you, Roslyn. About that vaccine ban, on the private importation and distribution of the COVID vaccine. What are we hearing?
Ben, thank you. Let me start by wishing Kenyans a happy Easter. This is the second time we are observing Easter under strict containment measures. But we thank God that we are here to celebrate this and witness the rise of Jesus Christ. Now, to go back to the issue of the vaccine, I think we've been getting conflicting communication from government. Remember, it was the media that first questioned the importation of the Sputnik 5 vaccine, the Russian vaccine, and by that time we're not sure whether the government had licensed the private players to import the vaccine, and if indeed they had gone through the safety standards that the government had put in place. Now, when we saw now prominent people going for this vaccine at a time that we had seen apathy in terms of the vaccine uptick that the government had brought, the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, then it raised the concerns that what exactly are we facing? And Friday's communication by the CS actually complicated matters further. Remember, the CS has a background in communication, and he knows why at a middle of a crisis like what we have, how do you whip the masses to actually rally behind what the government is doing. Remember, this is a global pandemic. The government should have taken lead to ensure that the vaccines that are coming on board are all that have been authorized by government. But to come in late into the day to say that they are revoking private players' licenses now takes the angle of a political process, because as much as the public were now giving in to the vaccine by the government, the fact that now the government has come in to invoke the licenses leaves a lot to be desired. That what is the end game? We have seen some politicians actually linking it to another private player now bringing in the Johnson and Johnson vaccine. Right. So I think where we are as a country, it's a very crucial moment, and the government should actually come very clean. What are they up to? If this is the role of the government solely, then we need to have, if the government will do this and will manage the masses, because remember what was brought in was 1,200,000. The population of Kenya now is going to 47 million. How many Kenyans will actually get the vaccine? Because if they're supposed to take 2 vaccines, then it's roughly 500 or 600 Kenyans who will get this vaccine.
All right. Dismas, the government says this move was aimed at trying to curb any importation of fake vaccines, try and centralize this process. But there's also raising questions about it being about business interests and all this. Are we staring at another COVID scandal?
Well, thanks for the opportunity. Now, it seems that in Kenya, wherever there is a crisis, then you've got commercial interest coming at play and influencing the decision-making process at the public sector. Because one fails to understand why vaccination, which is essentially a public good, should be left in the private sector. The moment you leave it to the private sector, then it means the poor Mura and Wajiko are exposed to the vagaries of capitalism. And in all mature economies, mature jurisdictions, including the US, that is doing 4 million vaccinations per day, everything has been left to the public sector. You cannot allow the commercial interest to play in an important sector like this when you are addressing a national security threat. So in my view, this is consistent with the way the Jubilee government has been behaving, that wherever there is a crisis, commercial interest will come at play and compromise the entire process. And you know, when we are being told that nobody knows who is bringing in this Russian vaccine in Kenya, then you begin to wonder, aren't these companies registered by the national government, the import declaration forms, all these documentation? So it's very easy to point out who is this person who is bringing these vaccines in Kenya. Right. And then the question to ask, the primary question is, why did the government in the first instance license a private sector operator to bring in the vaccinations? And then number two, what informed the decision to suspend the same license? Is it purely a public health issue, or are there commercial interests? And at the end of the day, do you support
the move to ban blanketly the importation of the vaccines by private investors?
Absolutely. That's a move that any rational thinking Kenyan must support, because you don't want to expose vaccination, a national exercise which is trying to contain a national threat to our security, to the private sector. You know, the private sector, the primary motivation is just to make a profit. So the moment you introduce a private sector, the moment you introduce a commercial interest, they may even cause an artificial shortage of the vaccines which has been sponsored by the government so as to make a profit.
But this would be to complement what the government is trying to do. If we have 1.02 million vaccines for all of us, it means if we have private people bringing the vaccine, then it means the people who can buy the expensive vaccines. That means there will be more vaccines, you know, from the government. Doesn't it mean that?
No. It doesn't work in that manner, because this thing is a delicate process about vaccination, and Kenya's got a very good track record of vendor-driven procurement,
right,
vendor-driven everything. So the moment you introduce the private sector, the moment you allow the private sector to start supplying essentially a public good,
yes,
then you're going to disadvantage Mura, because you know, the same people who take decisions in the private sector have got proxy companies the people who make decisions in the public sector. I've got proxy companies in the private sector. So they may come up with a public policy to favor their business interest.
All right. Mark Bichachi, what is your take on this ban by the government?
First and foremost, happy Easter to you and the viewers, and to the issue at hand. There are two things here that we need to consider. There is something called the public good that Dismas has talked about very well. But I would just like to add one critical point, that we cannot introduce classism into the distribution of vaccines, which was an issue because when elites are able to access the vaccine to the detriment of someone who's 58 plus and cannot afford the 8,000 odd shillings that were being charged, then we have a problem. Let us also understand that the issue that drives private investment is profit making. Now, we also need to be very careful to ensure that we do not dampen the spirits of our entrepreneurs. In my view, what needs to happen, and needs to happen urgently, is if somehow these private entrepreneurs are able to procure vaccines, then what should happen is a collaboration between government and these private procurers, so that they are able to distribute their vaccine in an equitable fashion. Because I do not think the criminality comes from importing the vaccine. I think the issue is in the creation of a class division. It comes in the implementation where we see, and this is probably part of the optics that went very wrong. You've got a president who's receiving the vaccine from the government, then you've got a deputy who's receiving the vaccine from a private hand, and such, the optics of it just didn't look good at all. In fact, it flew in the face of the hustler narrative. And it is that kind of interest of protecting the society and making sure that we prioritize health and not wealth. And that's really where the issue is. How do you solve it? Government needs to work with this private capital that has the money to import, and let's import together, and then so that we don't have this class stratification, and then we don't have people profiteering off of Kenya.
All right. Hesbon, talk to us about what Mark touched on there, the bad optics that we're seeing, the head of state receiving the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, and the deputy president reportedly receiving the Sputnik vaccine, and now the politicization of it all, with the allies of the deputy president now saying that the Sputnik vaccine is being fought because it's linked with the DP and all this. What do you say about all this?
Well, I think the optics in itself does not augur well with the government public interest initiative to get as many Kenyans as possible to be vaccinated. And I think the turn that Sputnik was taking was a lot more commercial, than you'd expect in the medical field. Because whether they were advertising or not, I think the big name social media personalities who are endorsing Sputnik, and then the fact that it went all the way to pictures of the deputy president taking a Sputnik jab, against the backdrop of the efforts by the president to encourage Kenyans to go for, the free vaccine that is driven by the government, was creating this impression that we live in a country where the government cannot provide a public essential good to its citizen in the wake of a pandemic. And something had to happen. And I think the move by the government to stop the importation, and distribution of this commercial vaccine is commendable from a public interest point of view. But then there are two things that come to the fore. One is that the moment the government took that measure, it essentially puts itself on the spot, And guys who are looking at private sector coming in to complement what the government was doing will now put the government on the spot, in the sense that they'll want to find out if the government can manage this, then we need to see how the government is expediting the process. And I think that in itself tells you the government has taken that responsibility. And I don't think that would have been possible with people posing with commercial vaccines out here. And then number two, Ben, I think and Dismal has already alluded to this, we live in a country where there are so many unscrupulous and callous businessmen who would pounce on any opportunity to make money, irrespective of how they're making it and the plight of the people of this country. And the danger of that cannot be emphasized. Already we have guys who've been arrested for having fake vaccines, which are going to sell to unsuspecting Kenyans. So something had to happen, and I think it's good that the government has come in to take over this public interest process.
I was reading comments online, some Kenyans supporting this, saying it's a good thing, otherwise Kenyans will find themselves being vaccinated with water in the streets. But I want us very quickly to touch on something related. That is the ban. On Friday, the United Kingdom government announced that it had added Kenya to its red list of travel ban, meaning that from this coming Friday, the 9th of April, any person who would have traveled through Kenya the previous 10 days will not be allowed to enter England. Dismas, your thoughts?
In my view, the primary responsibility of any government all over the world is to protect their citizens' interests. So if in the opinion of the UK government, getting visitors from Kenya is going to compromise their COVID fight, then they've got the primary responsibility to ban Kenyans or anybody traveling from Kenya. And also Kenya has got that primary responsibility as well. But going back to the issue that Will has raised, let me just buttress it, that the principal responsibility of the Deputy President of the Republic of Kenya is to work with his boss to ensure that every single Kenyan has got the vaccine which has been sponsored by the government. It's not up to him to start using the Sputnik, which I understand was driven by commercial interest, and then leave Mura at the peril of these vagaries, and then start doing a bit of propaganda saying that he was doing that so as to make sure that Mura back in the village, who is above the age of 58, will access that vaccine.
Rosalind, this comes barely a year after we sent the British people some flowers, and people have been making fun saying this is how they repay us. What is your take on this travel ban?
Ben, before I go to the travel ban, I think maybe just to go back to this issue of the vaccine. I think the blame lies with government. If we have systems that work, if we have leaders who follow what they say, I don't think we will be where we are now. Two, if the government had restricted the importation of vaccine, we will not be having this conversation. And three, the government did not do public participation before the vaccine came. Remember, there was the list of people who are the frontline workers who are supposed to get the first initial dose. And in that list, we had the security people, we had the health officers, we had the teachers, and we had the politicians. But remember, when these people declined to take up the vaccine, then it was now extended to the old people, and we are now seeing everybody getting this vaccine. Now, when you open a floodgate like that for everybody to get, then also the private players now come on board. So it depends with how much you have. If you are not interested in the government-free vaccine, you can now dig into your pocket and get the other vaccine. Now, to go to the ban by the UK, actually, if you look at what people are saying, it's like a slap in the face of the government. Because remember last year, the Kenyan government actually donated flowers to the UK, just in solidarity to show that this was a prime market where they've been doing business, and because of the impact of the COVID, then we had a setback. Two, if you have followed quite some time, we've been having issues where some of the British security officers were actually training in Kenya, had turned positive. But these were some of the classified information that didn't come out. Now, for the UK...
And also some people would say that you cannot compare the level of the virus in the UK and here in the country. In fact, we're the ones supposed to be issuing travel advisories.
Actually, somebody said it is 0.05% if you look at what is in Kenya and what is in the UK. But all this boils down to the diplomatic relations. Remember just last month, there was a tug of war in Parliament when we were passing the trade deals between Kenya and the UK post-Brexit. And if you looked at the deal that was signed, actually the benefactors were the UK, our former colony, and not Kenya. But it was passing because of the diplomatic ties that date back to the times of independence. Right. So now when we find a country that has been playing as a big brother post-Brexit now coming to impose travel bans, I think what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs did yesterday was just to also stamp your authority, because right. Kenya is now a sovereign state.
Hesbon, very quickly, talk to me about this. We signed a very good deal from a UK perspective, almost 15 years, tax haven, and then we sent them flowers last year. Then they do this. They're saying that it is because of a South African strain. What is your take, very quickly?
I think there are a number of things first of all, whatever they are afraid of in this country is rumored to have originated from Britain through their soldiers.
Right.
But I think the back and forth between the British government and the Kenyan government is something that has to be handled delicately. All the countries of the world today have to take keen interests in protecting their citizens. So because of the trade balance between the United Kingdom and Kenya, and the fact that the bulk of our exports go to the United Kingdom, and we depend on so many of their tourists and other economic elements based on the economic partnership agreement that was signed late last year, I think there's need to just listen keenly and find out to what extent do we protect our citizens and our territory to ensure that that bilateral trade with other countries is not affected by the COVID pandemic. And this is a collective responsibility. And most countries probably need to realize that it's not like there is any country that is going to live in isolation. You cannot block people indiscriminately and survive. So there has to be a give and take and a very diplomatic and economic consideration here.
Let's hear Mark's view on this. Very quickly, Mark.
One, Kenya reserves the right to demand for fair treatment from the UK, given the fact that a lot of the disease that they're even running from the UK itself is partly guilt. You know what their soldiers did in Nanyuki, and one was even bragging about it on social media. So Kenya has a right to push back, and the UK needs to listen to what Kenya is saying. And if it indeed it's a partner to Kenya, let it enter into a partnership conversation so we can see how to benefit both countries. They can't just unilaterally decide without even consulting us. So this is a matter for which I stand fully behind the red, white, and green of the flag. All right, we'll keep an eye on this story for you. We'll continue to update you on what happens. But from the 9th of April, any person that would have passed through Kenya the last 10 days will not be allowed into England. We'll continue to keep an eye on the latest on COVID-19 for you. Let's take a quick commercial break here on Inside Politics. Don't go too far. When we come back, we'll get into politics proper and talk about the handshake. Following weeks of disillusionment from some partners in the handshake, President Uhuru Kenyatta and ODM leader Raila Odinga finally coming out together, showing unity, inspecting government projects. We are told over a 3-hour meeting at night on Wednesday. Is the handshake now safe? Stay with us.